All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. My name is Rowan. I am the founder of Summit Strength, and I specialize in helping hikers get fit, strong, and resilient for their adventures. Now, today we are doing two simple things. Number one, we are hosting a live Q&A around any topics on training for hiking. So if you're watching this in real time, if you have any questions at all around your training or your physical preparation for the trail, feel free to pop it in chat. I'm always happy to answer. I'm always happy to help out. Now, I do have a couple of pre-prepared questions or sort of topics that I'm going to cover in between that to get us kicking over. And then on top of that, once that's all finished, then I'll be doing a little bit of open course creation on my new breathing training for hikers course, which is all about a really interesting area of training, which is called respiratory muscle training and how that can potentially help hikers. But with that being said, it's all going to be a pretty casual chat as we go through things. So if you do have any questions as you're watching, pop it up in chat and away we go. But in the meantime, let's get into the first question. So, footwear and training considerations for hikers. We all know the topic of footwear is big in the hiking community. And often we sort of get the question or get the sort of thought, what training should you do for your footwear? And does it matter? And should your training change whether you're wearing zero drop shoes or high cut boots or anything in between? Now, essentially, this particular topic was inspired by a little community poll we ran in our community group, all about footwear. And I was just curious about what the people in our group were actually wearing. And the numbers weren't too surprising, in all honesty. We sort of had an even split between mid-cut boots and trail runners. We had a small amount of people who were wearing high-cut boots and a very small amount of people who typically wear zero-drop shoes. Those numbers, if you asked me before, I would sort of say that's to be expected. It's not very surprising. And then obviously that doesn't add up to 100%. And there were, the remainder were just something else, or whatever it may be. On top of that, an interesting thing was, and again, pretty to be expected, but many people commented that they just switch between different footwear depending on different hikes, different seasons, different terrain, which makes perfect sense. I do the same thing. I go between my high cut boots and my sort of like lower support shoes, depending on the hikes I'm doing. Pretty normal. So the general consensus out of here is basically there is no one approach to footwear. This is common sense, but I feel like it does need to be said because sometimes when we go down the rabbit hole of hiking footwear and we start watching all these videos and looking at these influencers, we may get in our head that like everyone should be wearing zero drop shoes or everyone should be wearing trail runners or everyone should be wearing boots or whatever it may be. But in all honesty, it sort of comes down to your personal preference, your personal needs or whatever it may be. So for me, I'm not a big fan of saying, hey, you have to wear this footwear, go out and wear what you want, and that's absolutely fine. However, where I do come in this particular subject is essentially when it comes down to footwear and what you're actually wearing on your feet, there are certain considerations we probably do want to take with our training and certain things we just need to keep in the back of our head and maybe incorporate in our training sessions to get us in the best chance possible. Now, on the boots side of things, and I'm going to lump high cut boots and mid cut boots together. They're obviously a little bit different, but I'm going to lump them together. Typically, general rule of thumb is, boots are going to have a little bit more support. There's going to be more support around the ankles, a bit more of a, sturdier shoe. Going to give us a little bit more support. On top of that, weight is relatively high. Now, I'm not saying like, compared to old school boots where they literally were very, very heavy, new boots are pretty light. But comparatively, when we're looking at, trail runners or zero drop shoes, boots are always going to be a little bit heavier. So we need to be aware of that comparatively. Now, when it comes down to training considerations, if you're wearing boots, there's really sort of two big areas we just need to be aware of. Number one is ankle support. So one of the reasons people wear the sort of higher cut boots, and one of the main reasons for that, is essentially it gives it a lot of support, and specifically around the ankles. The ankles, obviously on the trail or on unstable terrain or on loose rocks and this and that, the ankles do take a bit of a battering. And a lot of people who are worried about their ankles, who are worried about turning over, will often go to high cut boots, which is perfectly normal. One thing we do need to be aware of, though, and this is a known phenomenon, and it is something you need to keep in mind, is if we hike in boots all the time. What this can do is it can lead our ankle stability to being a little bit undertrained because we grow so reliant on that extra ankle support from the boots, and their ankles themselves can get a little bit undertrained, which isn't really a big deal if you are wearing boots. However, if you do go into the situation where you hike without boots, so maybe you go on a trail and you're like, I'm going to try something like some shoes, or maybe your boots get ruined and you have to hike out, or maybe you forget a boot, or whatever it may be. There's a million and one situations where you may not be adding boots, even if you prefer them. This can lead to a higher risk of things going wrong. Essentially, a higher risk if you roll on the ankle. Because if you're stepping in that situation and usually your boots are looking after that support, but then you don't have those boots, all of a sudden, that can get us into a little bit of trouble. So essentially, if we are wearing boots and we're wearing that as a long-term thing and predominantly wearing this, we need to be aware of this ankle support. And I'm going to go in a moment, like how we can actually build that out. Now, on top of that, another thing we do need to be aware of is, as we said, the weight for boots is comparatively high. And typically the weight for boots are going to be heavier than what our normal footwear is day to day. They're going to be heavier than our sneakers. They're going to be heavier than what we wear to work unless you are trading. They're going to be heavier than, what you may wear in the gym. And essentially we just need to be aware of this because if you are going out hiking, and your boots do weigh a little bit more than what you're typically used to, even if you hike pretty regularly in your boots, there is going to be the situation where certain muscles are going to do a little bit more work in a lot of different situations. The fronts of the shins are going to do a little bit more work. Your fronts of your hips, your hip flexors are going to do a little bit more work just because you're just moving that little extra weight each time. Now, when you're just doing a 30-minute walk, a 40-minute walk, a 60-minute walk, this typically isn't that big a deal. But if we are going on an extended hike, whether it's a full day hike or an overnighter or a multi-dayer, this can lead to a few things. It can lead to earlier fatigue in those particular muscles. So maybe the shins get tired or the hips get tired, which can lead to them getting a bit tight, a bit sore, or whatever it may be. This can also lead to a bit more potential for accidents because if certain muscles get a little bit tired because we're not used to that sort of weight, this can lead to what we call our foot clearance. So how much we actually clear the ground each time we step, just going down to a little bit, reducing a little bit, which can lead to us just having more likelihood of tripping. So if those muscles get tired, our feet don't go up off the ground quite as much, which can lead to a little bit more chance of tripping. We've all been in that situation where our legs are tired and all of a sudden we're tripping over every rock and root on the trail. It's not much fun. Now, this ultimately goes double if you are having to push speeds which you're not used to. So if you're in the boots and you're bumping up speeds to keep up with a friend or a group or something which you're not used to and it's outside of your normal walking speed, this fatigue can come on a little bit early. So it's definitely something to be aware of and something we want to keep top of mind. Now, on the flip side of things, before I actually get to some particular exercises to recommend, on the flip side of things, let's talk about trail runners and zero drop shoes. And again, I'm just going to lump these together. Like they're obviously different things, like they're not all exactly the same, but I'm going to lump them together. Compared to boots, support is going to be relatively low. Even more so, when we're looking at barefoot shoes and stuff like that. But support is relatively low. And in these ones, the weight is relatively low as well. Pretty common sense. Training considerations, what we need to be aware of here is because there isn't a huge amount of ankle support, even though over the long term, this is probably going to be good for the ankles, we also do need to be aware of is if we're transitioning into shoes, we haven't worn them for a while, or if we're just sort of stepping out into challenging hikes in these shoes and we don't have that external support, then we probably in our training want to emphasize some ankle stability in our training, just to make sure you have a little bit of backup, just to make sure that your transition goes well, just to make sure you're giving your ankle the best chance possible of staying comfortable and surviving on the trail. Now, on top of that, is one thing we probably do need to consider as well is pack load. One thing I've sort of seen, and this is anecdotal, what I've seen from my clients, is basically the people who are introducing pack load. So maybe they're just stepping into a big day hike, which has a full pack, or maybe they're stepping out into an expedition, which has a full pack, but they haven't really been carrying a pack huge amount recently, and they're introducing that pack load. What we sort of typically find is people who are wearing the trail runners and zero drop shoes in the initial weeks, sometimes it can just put a little bit more pressure through the feet as everything's getting used to things. Sometimes it just can put a bit more pressure compared to boots because boots are a little bit sturdier. They maybe absorb the force a little bit more or whatever it may be. And sometimes we see this. So in this situation, it's not like you can't pack high in low support shoes. We just need to be aware of, okay, we just want to take a bit more of a gradual approach. So as opposed to just throwing on a pack and getting out there and absolutely smashing it, which you may potentially be able to do with boots, I wouldn't recommend it, but we want to be a bit more intentional here. Typically, the way that I would suggest doing this is if you are looking at lower support shoes and you're introducing a pack, typically the way of going about it, I would sort of say do a little bit of a combination of loaded pack walking and hiking. Now, the distinction between the two I call loaded pack walking is basically walking around the neighborhood on the treadmill, around a local park. It's not actually out on a hiking trail, but it's just local. These sessions tend to be shorter, so you might do this for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 60 minutes, maybe up to 90 minutes if you really want it. But these sessions tend to be a bit heavier. So we introduce these shorter walks, which are flat, but we load up a little bit heavier weight. So basically, you start this early, you introduce the body and the feet and the ankles to the weights through these sessions earlier, and ramp it up, ramp it up, ramp it up. And then on the hiking side of things, this tends to be a little bit longer. We'll end up doing multiple hours on the trail. I would typically start my hikers in this type of situation unloaded or with a really, really light pack and then slowly ramp up. So we're kind of doing those two things in unison. And essentially, what we would sort of look at as a longer term plan is if you had a trip, say, in 12 weeks, we would sort of say, okay, you know what, 2 weeks before your actual trip, we want to be at a point with our hiking where we can carry our max pack weight for the max time spent hiking that I need to do on this trail. So if I have an 6 hour day on my expedition with a 15 kilo pack, 2 weeks before I go, I want to be confident that I can do a 6 hour day hike with a 15 kilo pack. That's typically the way I look at things. On top of that, what I would typically do is plan out some loaded pack walking to essentially just be a little bit quicker in regards to ramp up. So essentially with the loaded pack walking, I would typically look at about halfway through the preparations to try to hit the full weight. So what that would mean is if we're training up for a 15 kilo pack over 12 weeks, I would sort of say, okay, by week 6, I might want to be able to do a 15 kilo pack for 45 minutes walking around. So you see the distinction between those two. And then after those 6 weeks, this can either be maintained or just use that as an easy maintenance session where each week you just do the same thing or just add a tiny little bit of weight, or you can change that to something else and maybe might transition that to another cardio session. But long story short, if you are using lower support stuff and you want to introduce some pack load, just be aware you need to be intentional there just to give yourself the best chance possible. So with that being said, like now we obviously know there's a few things you kind of want to put into action there. Let's talk about training advice and how to actually go about this and some particular exercises. So on the ankle stability side of things, we sort of said boots and shoes will both benefit from working on ankle stability, both for different reasons. Boots, because we don't want to be reliant on that external support. Shoes, because we don't have that external support. Even though it's different reasons, it's probably worthwhile making sure you're doing some ankle stability in your training. The good news for this is it doesn't have to be too complicated. It can be very, very straightforward and very, very simple. And what I would typically recommend for hikers, if we're in this situation, we're saying, hey, we want to support our feet, to focus on 3 and then potentially 4 things depending on your situation. Now, first of all, really, really simple way to start here is basically just doing some single leg strength exercises. Now, in all honesty, this is what every hiker should be doing anyway. There's just so many benefits to doing single-legged strength stuff to help you. But single-legged strength exercises in this particular context can, while we're building up strength in certain areas, also challenge our ankle stability. So a couple of simple exercises that I pretty much get all my hikers to do regardless of their ankles, but these are really, really good places to start. Number 1 is a step down, which if you followed my stuff for a while, you've seen me do a million times. So basically what this involves is standing on a step or a plate or a box, basically just slowly lowering yourself down, little pause, and then coming up. So this is really, 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 really simple, but what you will notice specifically with the ankles is the ankle will be wobbling around a little bit. You will have to put a little bit of keep quite a bit of attention to stop that ankle sort of falling over. If you can do this barefoot, even better, just because it takes away any external support. Now, this can be a great option because it also builds up your quad strength and your glute strength. It does a bunch of other things, but it really, really uses the ankle. If you do find this a little bit too easy, then you can just use a higher step and you can make this higher and higher and higher and higher until you find the right level of challenge for you. And if you find this too difficult and you're like, oh my gosh, I just cannot deal with this, then just hold something for support, like trekking poles or whatever it may be. Now, on the flip side, single-legged deadlifts work kind of the other end of the legs, the hamstrings and the glutes. Again, this is one I get most of my hikers doing at one stage or another. But basically what we're doing, slight bend of the knee, tipping over the hips. Again, you'll notice that your ankle is doing a lot of wobbling around. You kind of need to keep this stable. You can do this in shoes or barefoot as well, and you basically just work through this. If this is a bit too easy, you can do it without support and even add some weight with dumbbells or a pack. If you feel it's too hard, then you can use a little extra support or whatever. So those are two simple exercises which have a ton of benefits for hikers, but they can be a nice place to start. So next up, those are our, oops, wrong one. Those are our single-legged strength exercises. Then we will look at calf work. Now, all hikers know or have been told or aware that calf strength is important. Calf strength is so important for so many reasons on the trail. In this context, building up your calves can help support the ankles, help support the feet, help take a bit of pressure away from certain areas. Really, really useful. Typically, when we're looking at calf strengthening, we kind of want to get a nice combination of both straight leg and bent leg calf raises. So what that means, straight leg calf raises are probably the ones you're very familiar with. You can do, basically keeping one leg straight, just pushing straight up, coming straight down. You can do this off a step like it's demonstrated. You could do this from the floor. You could do this double leg, single leg, body weight, or with weight. There's a bunch of different ways of going about this. Realistically, when you're doing this, you could probably wear shoes. I did this demonstration without shoes, but you can wear shoes. This is very, very, very simple. That'll work out one part of the calves. Now, the flip side of things, on top of that, is doing some type of bent leg calf raise. So this is an example where we basically got sitting on a chair and we got our legs bent here. And what we're doing is we're putting a weight on here and we're basically just slowly lowering and then pushing up. Now, the difference between this and a straight leg calf raise is basically this particular version will work the calves a little bit lower. It'll predominantly work what's called the soleus, which is a little bit deeper, a little bit lower in the calves. The straight leg versions will predominantly work or bias a little bit more the gastrocnemius, which is a little bit higher. And getting the combination of both can be a good way of going about it. The only thing with the soleus is basically it is surprisingly strong. You may just put a little bit of weight on here and maybe super easy. So you do have to load this up a little bit to get the best effect. But putting those two together can, again, play a big role in supporting your feet, supporting your ankles, helping you feel good. And then next up is proprioception work. So basically proprioception work is balance, basically. Basically just teaching the body to be aware of to know where it is in space. With this, doesn't have to get too complicated. Balance training for hikers can sometimes just get a little bit out of whack. People can just do way too much and just really crazy things. I like to keep things simple. First place to start is just some simple single leg balance work. So what you can do is basically go on one leg, arms crossed, barefoot, and literally just hold it. Now, in this situation, you can start with your eyes open and go with that. If that feels a little bit too easy, then you can do what I did here, where you basically close your eyes and hold that for as long as you want. Very, very, very simple. But again, you'll notice that the ankle's wobbling around all the place. You're working on your balance, you're working on your ankle stability, works really well. Once that gets a little bit easy, then you can basically add something under your feet. You could put a pillow under your feet. You could put like a folded up mat under your feet. If you have a stability disc or something, you could do it. And again, that'll just add some extra instability and it can be very, very useful. And literally just holding that, hanging out. And then the third level, then you can mostly, once you're happy with that, you can add some sort of stuff that's a little bit more dynamic. And there you go, I'm wearing the same shirt as today. Who would have thought? And yeah, something a little bit more dynamic. So in this situation, we're standing on one leg. We've got that folded up mat that I was mentioning before. Here we've got like a weight. And basically what we're doing is we're passing it around the body. And essentially what this is doing is essentially just turning a bit more dynamic, changing that motion a little bit, challenging the ankles. So this can be really good, again, for the ankles and the balance. Very, very, very useful. So I would sort of say for the most part, most people who are looking at ankle stability, those three things will tend to be enough. In all honesty, for most hikers out there, I will get them doing pretty much this stuff anyway, even if they're not particularly worried about their ankles, because all of this has really good benefits for anyone. But when we're in this context, just highlighting the benefits of those particular things. And then if you are a little bit more worried and you're like, you know what, I've had ankle issues in the past, I've been doing this, I'm still a bit worried or whatever it may be, then you may just add in some direct ankle work as well, which can be as simple as, get rid of that, get rid of that. It can be as simple as doing like a TheraBand exercise. So this is not my video, it's coming from Coca Rehabilitation Services. You can check them out, but this is a nice video I like, where basically you get a band, wrap it around your feet, and then basically we're just doing a little bit of repetitions one direction, a little bit of repetitions on the other direction, and then basically he'll turn around, and then basically he'll go the other way, a little bit of repetitions the other way, and then finally repetitions coming in. So the benefit of this is this first one that he's doing here we probably get that movement from our calf raises, and that's fine. But these sort of lateral movements can be nice, and just an extra way of just adding extra challenge to the ankles can be really useful. Now with this stuff, if it's a bit awkward doing it with the band and like crossing things over, you can just attach it to a table and just move around and just do forward and back and this can just be a nice way of building things out. It can work out pretty well. So if you're looking at ankle stability, those three are essentials. They go a really, really long way for pretty much everyone. And on top of that, that direct ankle work can be a nice addition. So that's the ankle stability, beneficial for both boots and shoes, and most hikers will get benefits from that regardless. Now, the other issue we were talking about with the boots is that foot clearance and that fatigue management. Because realistically, if you're hiking every single week in boots, you're probably fine with this. Your body will get used to it. It shouldn't be a big deal. It's all good. Now, alternatively, if you are only hiking once every 2 weeks, or once every 3 weeks, or once every 4 weeks, or potentially maybe you just had winter and you're not hiking a huge amount, you're about to come into hiking season or whatever it may be, this is definitely something to be aware of if you're going out in boots. Because we want to have a think about, okay, how can we minimize the risk of those smaller muscles getting fatigued? How can we minimize the risk of that foot clearance getting affected? How can we make sure that we are comfortable in getting through? So a couple of simple things you can throw in here, very, very straightforward. Number one is building a bit direct strength in the area, and specifically in the hip flexors. That tends to be the area that we want to work the most. And building some direct strength in here. A very, very simple way of going about this is what we call a hip flexor march, where basically you get a band, wrap it around each leg, and essentially all you're doing is just driving the knee up and down, and driving the knee up and down. And what we're doing here is we're just working that little muscle in the front of the hip, building up the strength there. You can also do like a hip flexor hold as a good start, where you literally just do this, pull it up to the top and hold this position for, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 45 seconds. Works out pretty well, but that can go pretty well. Hip flexor march is simple. And then finally, endurance. So strength is like, directly loading it up with a huge amount of weight. One thing that can trip us up is when we're out on the hot trail is we may end up doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of repetitions with these muscles because every single step we're doing takes it out. So we kind of want to think about, okay, in our training, how can we expose our body to this? A very, very, very simple way of going about this is, okay, step ups, very, very common for hikers, and basically just doing some of this in your boots. So wearing your boots, got a box, and you're literally just stepping up and down. Again, this isn't my video. This is Champion Physical Therapy and Performance. You can check them out. But basically, yeah, just stepping up and down, up and down. But you're wearing this in the boots. So you basically got that little bit extra weight in the boots, and you're teaching the body that this is okay. You're building up the strength because you got the boots on. And you may do step ups for 4 minutes at a time, or 5 minutes at a time, or 6 minutes at a time, and build that up over time. And that works out pretty well. So not only can this be a really good cardio session because you're literally just getting exposure to that climbing, but it also can be very relevant here. So a lot of this stuff, it does cross over just into normal and general preparation for hikers. But if you are specifically thinking about footwear, a lot of this stuff can be good. But boots, whether you're boots or shoes, ankle stability is definitely beneficial. And then if you are wearing boots and you haven't worn them a while, or you don't wear them as regularly as you like, definitely consider this a bit of direct hip flexor work and some endurance stuff as well. That will tend to fill things out pretty well, and I think that can be a nice addition for every hiker out there. So hopefully that all makes sense. I'm losing my voice today, so we will see how we go for this full 60-minute stream. So Portia, I've got a question from you. Hey Portia, hope you're well. What if you don't have a gym membership to a gym? Home exercises would be great to show. So realistically, pretty much all the exercises that I just sort of showed there, they can pretty much be done at home. The only one that you probably wouldn't do is that sort of seated calf raise. So I showed, oops, that's on my videos. Let me pull this up. So the only one that I sort of showed out of all that sequence that's not really doable at home is this seated calf raise where you kind of need a bit of weight. And this one here. So this one can be a little bit tricky. If you don't have weights at home, what's going on? It cannot work out so well. So another option is basically we were sort of looking at that bent knee category there. Bent So another option you can do is like a bent leg calf raise, where it's very, very similar to what we were doing with the straight leg one. But basically what you're doing here is just bending over with your knees. So you're on a little thing, a little knee bend, and basically popping up and down, up and down. That tends to work out pretty well. So in regards to what I was just covering, I think pretty much all of that can be done at home. And you can just get a bit creative with equipment. When it comes down to actually training at home, in regards to just our extra exercises, I would sort of say like 90% of, or 95% of exercises you do at the gym can still be done at home if you just get a little bit creative. Typically for my hikers, what I typically recommend is if they are training at home, all we really need is basically, in regards to equipment, is a backpack. So you can use your hiking backpack and a set of like mini bands or TheraBands, which can be really, really useful. And basically, and the TheraBands, if you're not sure, um, those that's it. Basically, these, with all of that, you can kind of do pretty much everything you need. The only thing that really you miss out in the gym is like obviously the machines. So basically, the strength machines and the cardio machines. Sometimes they can be a little bit harder to replicate, but it works out pretty well. And one thing I would recommend as well is if you are just curious about exercises, which you can do at home, which doesn't require any equipment. If you whether you follow my YouTube or follow my Instagram, I've been putting out shorts recently, which I've just been doing, and basically each week, I'm putting like 5 shorts, or I'm trying to put out 5 shorts, but I'm putting out a few exercise ones every couple of days, and all the ones I'm doing with exercises are demonstrated with a backpack, so it doesn't really require any particular equipment. I think I've got 17 up so far. I'm going to be ending up sharing about 100. So and yeah, and you can basically just have a scroll through those. There's a bunch of different options in regards to it. And then on top of that, I will sort of say, Portia, if there's anything specific and you're like, hey, I've got this particular area that I would like to work on, what is something I can actually do while I'm at home without any equipment, just post up in the chat. I'm happy to sort of show you some specific examples. But hopefully that helps. Um, yeah, and as we're going through, if there's any other questions, any other questions about anything, feel free to just post up in the chat. Happy to answer them. Happy to help out. Chill. So with that being said, what else have I got? Fueling in the morning. So this is the other topic I kind of wanted to cover today, because there's definitely something that comes up a bit. And basically the question I got from someone was, well, let me get my record this. So fueling in the morning. Yeah, the question that inspired this particular section is, I know it's important to fuel before training, but I can't bear the thought of eating first thing in the morning, and I would have to wake up hours early before my stomach settles. What can I do? Really, really common situation for hikers, particularly if you are trying to train before work or train first thing in the morning, or if you're hiking quite early in the morning as well. Um, Now, basically, Portia, yeah, absolutely. So dig through those videos. If there's anything particular you, yeah, as I said, want to learn, or anything that doesn't make sense, feel free to post up in the chat here or come join our community group. You can post up in there. Yeah, more than happy to help you out there. Now, going back to the fueling in the morning, problem in this situation is basically when it comes down to our training sessions, whether it's our training or our hiking, having some fuel is pretty essential to perform in our sessions. Because when it comes down to it, anyone can really survive their training without eating. Anyone can wake up first in the morning, go to the gym, kind of get through a session without anything in your stomach. We can survive. Realistically, if you want to perform at your best, if you want to have the most energy, if you want to minimize fatigue, if you want to get the most out of your sessions, we probably want to eat something. We want something in our stomach because food is fuel. Food will provide the energy we need to actually perform in our sessions. Now, this gets even more important the more intense our session is. If you're just going out for a casual walk or casual cycle or really, really low intensity session, you can probably skip this. Like, it's not particularly necessary. But when we're looking at slightly more difficult sessions, if we're doing some strength training, or if we're doing some stair training, or if we're doing, a heavier pack walk, or if we're going on a hike which just has a tough section immediately, or whatever it may be, we really do want to pay attention to this. Now, in the perfect world, when it comes down to this type of stuff, we would sort of typically, before a training session, have something carbohydrate based about 1 to 2 hours before training. Now, the reason I say carbohydrate based is because carbohydrates are typically what's going to fuel us for the most part in regards to our sessions, and this can be really useful. This is pretty easy to do if you're training at lunchtime, or if you're training mid-morning or in the afternoon, or even in the evening, because we can line this out. But if you're training first thing in the morning, it can get a little bit tricky. Um, if you are immediately waking up first thing in the morning and then training, this can lead to just food sitting in your stomach. Sometimes we do this and we're like, oh my gosh, the food's in my stomach the whole time. I'm just bloated. I'm uncomfortable for my whole session. If we have too much, this can actually go the opposite way. It can actually reduce our performance because what can happen is when we're digesting, our gut needs some blood. It needs blood there to digest. It needs the oxygen. So when we're exercising, our muscles typically want all that oxygen. So what can happen is if we are diverting blood and oxygen to our gut to help digestion, that can reduce performance a little bit. So it's not much fun. So this kind of puts us in this situation where we run the risk of being uncomfortable, or we have to kind of wake up super early. And if we're already training at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, having to wake up super, super early will compromise our sleep. And no one wants to wake up 2 hours earlier than a morning session just to eat. It's not really going to be super sustainable. So with that being said, what is the solution here? Basically, the solution to this is if you want to play around with it, basically you want to play around with different food types to see what works best with you. So if you've tried this once or twice and you've said, hey, I had like this and it just didn't work well, just know there's lots of different things you can experiment with to kind of make things better. Essentially, if you're eating right before training, if we're pre-fueling in the morning or within that 1 to 2 hour area, typically what we want to think about in regards to fueling, as we sort of said before, high carbohydrate, that's the stuff that's going to give us fuel for our energy, that's for our exercise, and that's what can energize us the most. But on top of that, we want to be looking at that with low fat, low fiber, low protein. The reason why we are looking at these, low fat, low fiber, low protein, is all of these do take longer to digest, meaning it will slow down digestion, meaning it will keep a little bit more sitting in our gut, not so great. You may look at this and be like, okay, you know what, that's fine, but isn't that the opposite of what I'm often told to eat? Aren't I told to have a lot of fiber? Aren't I told to have a lot of protein? Isn't that what I'm supposed to be snacking on? And yes, if you are kind of sitting around in an office and just not just snacking here and there, though that is good advice because more protein, more fiber will keep us fuller for longer so we don't overeat or whatever it may be. But when we're looking at pre-training, it's kind of the opposite. We want something that's going to be easy to digest, something that's not going to sit in our stomach. So what you can try here is if you've sort of gone out, sort of had, something before training and you're like, oh, that didn't really work, then you can sort of look at high carbohydrate, low fat, low fiber, see if this works. This may be a case of just having a banana, super enough, or half a banana even. Might be a case of having a handful of dried fruit, having some apricots or some dates or something like that. Or maybe having just some white bread and jam. Pretty good. Or a bagel and jam, or bagel and honey, or something like that. Again, this type of stuff is not our typical healthy eating, but it's this quick to digest stuff. Or even like rice cakes with honey. All of this stuff will digest pretty quickly, and it can work. Now, this may work for you. For some people, this may work absolutely fine. You're like, cool, that's a solution. Happy days. I can have this like half an hour before training, and this works out pretty well. Alternatively, if you're like, oh, I tried this, and either like I just do not feel like eating at all, like it's just not anything, or it still sits in my stomach, then the next level of this is to kind of consider liquid calories in the sense that when we've got liquid calories, so food that is liquid, it's typically digested quicker. Very, very simple. Um, Portia, I'll get to that question in just a second. I'll wrap this up, but I can definitely help you out with that. It's typically digested quicker. So a few examples you can sort of have a look at is a smoothie. So basically you could make a smoothie the night before and then just sip a little bit of the smoothie in the morning. That may be enough to give you that energy. Typically, if we're looking at a smoothie as a pre-training smoothie, again, we want to kind of keep it low protein, low fat, low fiber. So it might just be like a fruit smoothie or something like that, and that can work out pretty well. You might look at fruit juice, like a glass of orange juice or a glass of apple juice. That can often work. Some people don't particularly love like orange juice on an empty stomach, so that's fair enough that doesn't work, but that can be an option. Or alternatively, you could have an electrolyte supplement with carbohydrates. This is literally what electrolyte supplements and carbohydrates are designed for, to be quick digesting, doesn't sit in your stomach, can be really useful. I typically recommend hikers have something like this for their hikes because it can be a really easy way of fueling and getting food in. But if you're training first thing in the morning and just cannot stomach anything else, this can be really, really useful. So literally just having half a serving of this or a whole serving of this before training or just sip it in the start of your training could work out pretty well. So if you are in a situation where you're trying to fuel in the morning and you've got important training sessions, you've got training sessions in the morning, but you're not really eating anything, they're probably good things to explore. If you really go through all of that and like it still doesn't work for me, okay, maybe you want to look at other solutions, but hopefully that gives a few ideas on that front. So next question. So yeah, Portia, is zone 2 training on treadmill good for endurance? So yeah, basically when it comes down to it, zone 2 training is definitely good for endurance. The whole idea behind zone 2 training is basically just managing your intensity and restricting your intensity to a level where it's predominantly working out aerobic energy system. So if you haven't heard of sort of that type of stuff before, our aerobic energy system is basically it's a system in a body designed to create energy over long periods of time. It's basically very, very efficient. It creates a lot of fuel for a lot of energy for the amount of fuel it uses, and it's designed to be slow and just go for long, 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 long periods of time. Now, on the flip side, we have our anaerobic energy systems, which is basically designed for quick bursts of energy. Our anaerobic systems are designed to if we're running or sprinting or jumping or whatever it may be, when the body needs energy quickly. Now, but what happens with these anaerobic energy systems is because it's speed, it basically sacrifices efficiency. So essentially it ends up creating not quite as much energy per unit of fuel it uses. And it also comes with some some waste products, which basically just lead to fatigue. So basically the division between the two, aerobic is designed for long periods of exercise, anaerobic designed for shorter, sharper periods of exercise. As a hiker, if we are a hiker or a mountaineer, we're trying to improve our ability on the trail. We want to improve our aerobic energy system as much as we can. We want to improve our aerobic energy system to the absolute limits, because the more we can build this and develop this, the longer we'll be able to hold off fatigue, the more we'll be able to sustain on the trail, the less fatigue and the quicker we'll be able to go with less fatigue. On the flip side, if people are just sort of doing lots and lots and lots of anaerobic training and they're working at higher intensities, really, really pushing things, this can lead us to sort of neglecting our aerobic energy system, which isn't great, and also overtraining or let's say overusing our anaerobic energy systems, which isn't a terrible thing in like general day-to-day life. But if we're a hiker who's trying to move for hours and hours and hours and hours at a time, potentially days, potentially weeks, potentially months if you're a through hiker, then that's not ideal. So coming back to the whole concept of zone 2 training, essentially zone 2, if we are sticking with this, it will ensure that we are predominantly working our aerobic energy system, and that can be really good. So basically hopping on the treadmill, doing sessions where we're walking, we're on the incline, where we're carrying a pack, even if you're jogging, working at that zone 2 can be pretty good. Now, if someone's in a situation where they don't have a heart rate monitor and they're like, what are zones or whatever it may be, if you're not using a heart rate monitor, you can also use the same measure as nose breathing. Basically going at a pace where you can breathe in and out through your nose comfortably. Relatively similar to the same thing. And I often ask my hikers to do that. Now, the main things to sort of consider when we're going down this route is essentially if we're doing zone 2 training on the treadmill, that's great. But like any type of cardio training, if we are trying to actively improve our endurance and improve us for our adventures, then we want to make sure that we are still applying some type of progressive overload. Because when it comes down to any type of training, the body gets used to things relatively quickly. And if we don't continually apply more stimulus and more stress and more challenge, it will not really be forced to adapt and it'll just stay the same. So we want to progressively make things harder for the body so it'll get more and more and more. When we're looking at zone 2 training, one thing we need to be aware of is, okay, the natural tendency, a lot of people as they get fitter and as they progress things, they just want to push quicker. They want to run quicker, they want to walk quicker, they want to do more incline or whatever it may be. But if we're looking at this zone 2 training, which is really aimed at aerobically, adding that extra intensity may not be what we want, because maybe it'll end up getting the heart rate too high, getting us into other zones, which end up working us anaerobically a little bit more. So if you're looking at zone 2 training, first thing, if you do have the opportunity, is just adding extra time. So if you do a 30-minute walk one week, then 35 minutes the next, 40 minutes the next, 45 minutes the next, that can work really well. Obviously, there is a limit to that, and that can end up being a very big time suck, so it won't always be accessible, but that's probably the best place to start. And when we're looking at hiking training, that's kind of what we want to look at. Over time, build, 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 build. Other ways you can kind of add intensity is basically, adding incline, adding pack weight, adding speed, but while making sure that zone 2 doesn't creep up to something else or that nose breathing doesn't get out of control. So super long story short, yes, Porsche zone 2 training is good for endurance. Just make sure you're hitting the right intensity so you're working that aerobic energy system as much as you can and make sure you still are applying progressive overload. in a way which isn't compromising that zone two or isn't compromising that nose breathing. Um, so I hope that answers your question there, and I hope that gives a little bit of clarity. If anything in that didn't make sense, Portia, or if I went off on a tangent and didn't actually answer what you wanted, just let me know. I'm happy to help. So, with that being said, so we've covered footwear and training considerations for hikers. We've covered fueling in the morning. We've covered zone two training a little bit, and a little bit in regards to home exercises. So, yeah, what we might shift to now, if there's no other questions, and if anyone does any questions, pop it in the chat. We'll do a little bit of course creation. So this is kind of the flip side of these live Q&As. So basically, after the question and answer, I'm basically just doing a little bit of open course creation. Here, what we're doing is I'm putting together a new course for hikers. It's basically about breathing training and specifically talking about something that's called respiratory muscle training, which is similar to strength training for our muscles in the sense that we're trying to improve our strength in our muscles. We use dumbbells. Respiratory muscle training is strength training for our breathing muscles, where we apply load to our breathing muscles to improve them in certain ways. And I think this is a very interesting area for hikers. I think it's a pretty cool area that could see some good benefits for potential for different hikers. And I think it's an area that hasn't really been covered very well in the hiking community, and people who talk about it, kind of hit and miss the mark a little bit or whatever it may be. So essentially, I'm putting together this course like live on these streams, just to give you a little inside look into kind of how I go about this. And yeah, so the plan for today and the way I go about these courses, it's very, very here and there. Initially, it's just me just putting together sort of topics and ideas of things that kind of spring to mind and kind of sound good. And then over time, I refine it. Over time, I kind of get into a bit more structure and this and that. And eventually, when this is released, everything's going to be nice and condensed. This is going to be a free course which people can get access to, and it should be good. So the plan for today, what we're going to be covering and what I sort of thought I'd sort of go through is two simple things. Number one, just going over who should consider this type of training, because it's definitely not something everyone needs to be doing or anything like that, but sort of go into that. And then hopefully get into some foundational breathing strategies as well. So basically foundational strategies people should practice and master before they actually do this type of stuff. So let's come down and find my brief notes that I had before. Who should consider this? Let's copy and paste this. Where am I going to put this? What is respiratory muscle training? Yeah, let's pop this over here. So, who should consider respiratory muscle training? To be clear, this isn't for everyone. So I think that's the first thing we kind of need to make clear here, in the sense that respiratory muscle training, it's not for everyone. It isn't something that like everyone needs to be doing. And sometimes you'll see these courses and you see these videos and they're like, this is the next big thing. Everyone should be doing this or whatever it may be. I would only say a really small percentage of hikers out there really need to do this, maybe 1 or 2% at the very most. It can be a nice addition to things, but it's not a necessity. Realistically, respiratory muscle training is always going to be considered an accessory method of training. And this is funny in the sense that there was a little while back, I was kind of came up in a mountaineering group where someone was asking about this type of training. And someone was like, hey, has anyone come across this before? Is it useful for mountaineers, whatever it may be? And I put up a few thoughts around, okay, there's some potential benefits, for mountaineers, which sort of cover, where is it? Cover things like, delayed premature, premature fatigue, include clearance of metabolic byproducts, decreased breathlessness, increased SO2 levels, all of that stuff. And I was like, you know what, that's kind of uh, yeah, those are kind of some potential benefits. And then someone like, as is always the case of like when we talk about certain things, someone piped up and was like, well, I think it's crazy if you would use this instead of a cardio training program. And it's like, it's not what this is for. Like, it's not a replacement for anything. It's not something that's going to replace your cardio or your strength or anything like that. It's an accessory method of training. Realistically, you are going to get the most benefits from your breathing, from your hiking, and from your performance from just doing a progressive and structured training program, making sure you have aerobic conditioning, making sure you're doing strength training, making sure you're doing hiking specific conditioning, which is like hack walking, stair climbing, that type of stuff, which is specific to hiking, and making sure over time we progressively make it harder. Um, so many majority hikers out there probably have so many benefits they can get out of just like honing and these things and getting more out of that. Realistically, I would only say if you're already doing these things and you still are struggling with your breathing, then you would sort of consider this type of stuff. RMTB. And it's always, always, always going to be considered an accessory method of training. Now, why is this? So I would sort of say best benefits for people who struggle on sleep. So I would sort of say probably people who kind of fall into the best benefits of this, just off the top of my head, I'll probably add a few more in here. There's basically people who struggle with breathing on steep uphills, very, very common. And I say struggle with breathing on steep uphills and they're already doing this stuff, may get some benefits. People are going to high altitude. So as we said before, there's some cool potential benefits of this. Again, people are going high altitude who are already doing this. Also people who are like get a little bit of anxiety when their breathing speeds up when you get this breathless feeling and it's a little bit uncomfortable. A lot of people do like that stresses them out. That makes them worry. That makes them self-conscious. That like, and it turns into like this sort of circular thing where it's just builds off it, builds off it, builds off it. One of the best benefits of this respiratory muscle training can actually reduce our perception of breathlessness. So if you get breathless and you get stressed out from that, this may be very, very useful for that. And then also for other people who may have like breathing limitations. So maybe you've got a really, really small nasal passage and you feel like just getting air in certain times is a struggle or other things like that. Maybe worthwhile. There's definitely a few people who shouldn't be doing this. Contraindications. That's not how you spell it. Yeah, there's definitely some people who shouldn't be doing this type of stuff. And like with any type of training, if you've got a bit more of a complex medical history or if you're unsure about how something fits into your particular situation, definitely talk to a doctor and figure out. But basically, here's a few very specific contraindications. This is like just copied from um, the learning that I've done. Um, and yeah, basically, if you have issues around there, or if you have issues with your eardrums, probably not what we want to do. Because when we're doing this respiratory muscle training, we're putting a lot of force into the breathing muscles, we're putting a lot of pressure into the lungs, not something we want to mess around. And then also temporary contraindications. Um, Basically, if you've recently just had a cold or something, you probably just want to let things chill out. Let yourself recover before we kind of get into things. So I would sort of say that people best consider it, and there's a few people that probably should avoid it. What else was I going to cover today? We did this, so we can get rid of that. Oh yeah, let's cover foundational breathing techniques. So yeah, that was just sort of something I wanted to add in. Again, I'll build that stuff out in the future and sort of see what else goes into that. Now, before we wrap up today, we've got 10 more minutes and I'm about to lose my voice. Let's sort of cover some getting started, some foundational breathing um, techniques. Uh, getting started. Foundations stuff. Um, so basically, before we even get into any of this type of respiratory muscle training, before we start applying load to the breathing muscles, we really do want to make sure that we are doing the best breathing mechanics we can. Because as we sort of said before, like in a previous stream, when we're going through the breathing, the different muscles responsible for breathing. When we're inhaling, basically our primary inspiratory muscle is our diaphragm. So diaphragm a little bit lower, close to our belly, and our external intercostal. So some of the muscles responsible in between our ribs. They're our primary breathing muscles. On top of that, we have our accessory breathing muscles. We've got our sternocleidomastoid and we've got our scalenes, which are all a little bit higher in the chest, for the neck and the shoulders. Now, one tendency that a lot of people have in just everyday life is we don't rely on the diaphragm as much as we could. We kind of fall into a habit where we turn into this chest breathing, where we actually rely on that accessory breathing muscles a little bit more than we should. Now, if we are in that type of pattern where we don't use the diaphragm a huge amount and we use this a lot, and then we apply load, what will probably happen is the diaphragm won't get the training stimulus it wants and will probably end up applying more load to this, which can lead to a tight neck, can lead to reduced performance, reduced benefits, not really what we want. So essentially what we want to make sure is like before we even get into this, that we're just nailing this diaphragm breathing and making sure we're really, really getting the things. So I should have written that down. This probably isn't the right terminology, but I'll put this in here as a placeholder. I'll make that a little bit nicer. Um, so yeah, we want to ensure that we're teaching the body to use the diaphragm as much as possible to get the best training effect for RMT, targeting the right muscles and not get a sore neck. I think that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Basically, technique. So a lot of us has come across diaphragmatic breathing or abdominal breathing or belly breathing before. So a lot of people will kind of be aware of this. But I'm going to pop this all in here. And this is, again, I've just taken this out of the materials that I've learned this from and pop this in. And essentially, yeah, we're just going to go through the real basics of it all. So objective, what we are trying to get out of this is ensure our breathing muscles are used holistically and in central, that's not right, both during both training and hiking. Practice. So the best place to start with this, and you can do this in front of a mirror, tends to be really useful, is basically we want to get our hands similar to this, where basically hands are kind of like the fingers are almost touching. We want to put those fingers across our belly button, and we're just resting lightly in the ribs. Essentially, it just gives us a little bit of like both visual feedback from the mirror, but also we can actually feel if the fingers are coming apart or not, which is useful as we're getting into things. Now, essentially, set up. We are looking for. A good way to start with this is just getting the visual in your head. The diaphragm, basically, what will happen is when we breathe in, it's going to flatten and move downward like a piston, pushing the abdominal organs down and outwards. So we want to think about this. The diaphragm is sitting a little bit lower here. As we breathe in, it flattens and moves downwards. It pushes our abdominals out, downwards and out. So we want to kind of keep that top of mind. Practice. Then we want to start. Keep Keep your abdomen, shoulders, and chest relaxed. Take a deep but slow inhalation through your nose. Essentially, what we want to do here is if we're set up in the mirror, we want to watch the movement of our abdomen and our ribs in the mirror. And essentially, what we want to sort of see is when you're inhaling, we want to make sure that we're seeing the abdomen, so the belly, bulge out a little bit, and we want to see our ribs move sideways and forwards. And when I put this in the course, I'll probably do like a video of me doing this and just be able to talk over it, which will so you can actually see me doing the demonstration. That tends to work a little bit better than me just talking about it. Then essentially you just want to watch, as we sort of said before, watch the fingertips and try to move them apart with the abdomen as you're doing it. Ultimately, if your chest rises, so when we're doing this, if your chest rises and the belly isn't moving, but the chest is moving, then the diaphragm isn't doing what we want to. So we just want to reset, relax the chest, relax the shoulders, and then do it again. And essentially, when we're looking at the exhalation on this, we want to just make sure it's relaxed. So we're not forcefully exhaling or anything like that. We'll just let things fall out. Now, with that being said, there is a little bit more to hear, but I'm really close to losing my voice, and I've got a few more calls for this afternoon. So we might wrap this up here today. So I will sort of say for anyone watching this in the future, if you do have any questions from any of the stuff I covered today, feel free to reach out, come join our community group, send me an email, whatever it may be. For anyone who does have questions for future streams, I'm going to be doing these Tuesdays and Fridays. I won't be doing next Friday because I have a funeral, but after that, I'll be doing Tuesdays and Fridays for the next 6 months or so. If you have any questions you'd like me to cover, send them over to me. I'll cover these and yeah, we'll have a chat from there. But with that being said, for anyone watching live, I hope you've enjoyed this. For anyone watching the future, I hope you got a little bit out of this. Have a lovely Friday. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Take it easy, guys. Bye.